It was at 2 a.m. local time on Monday that a seismograph on a small Danish island picked up the first tremor. Soon, the water off its coast started churning. And then, 15 hours later, another one, this time 2.3 magnitude. Not an earthquake, scientists say, but mid-water explosions, the force of which blew open 2 gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea, now spewing unknown quantities of highly flammable methane up to its surface.
It's clear that those incidents are not coincidence. All information available so far seems to be indicated that it has been a deliberate act, deliberate damage which was created.
The explosions triggered 3 large gas leaks along major pipelines from Russia to Europe. Leaks discovered some distance apart, east of the island of Bornholm. 2 of them here along the Nordstream 1 pipeline, and a further one along Nordstream 2. Very close to the new Baltic pipeline, bringing gas over from Norway to Poland, weaning Europe off Russian supplies. Its inauguration was just yesterday, prompting speculation around timing and motive, not least from Poland's Prime Minister, who described it as a very strange coincidence, and its Foreign Minister speaking last night in Washington.
We are not in a position to reject the notion that this could be an element of Russian hybrid war against NATO.
Nord Stream 1 and 2 are, for now, concrete and steel white elephants. They were built at vast expense so that Russia's state-owned energy supplier Gazprom could export gas directly to Germany and into Europe. But that gas inside them is standing idle, the war in Ukraine and subsequent rupture between Russia and Europe having turned off the taps.
It's our belief that it was almost certainly a state actor because of the sophistication of that sabotage act. We don't know for a fact, but we do suspect Russia is probably behind this.
The Russians invested billions in this. Why on earth would they want to blow it up?
Yes, it is a monumental waste of money, but you could argue that about the, Gazprom made 80% of its export revenues part of this war by selling to Europe, and that's gone. So President Vladimir Putin has clearly sacrificed Gazprom for the cause of his war, and the economic long-term damage to Russia is going to be absolutely enormous.
Russia agreed with NATO and the EU that this was an act of sabotage, but said it was the US administration, who've never supported Nord Stream 2, that should be investigated. Europe and the US are loath to lay blame for now, but it'll be weeks before it's safe enough for investigators to get close to the site of the blast. Some gas is still flowing into Europe from Russia through, of all places, Ukraine. But threats Gazprom could halt supplies altogether have pushed prices up again today. Pipelines, geopolitical puppet strings underpinning the war, and this one here has now snapped.
Well, in the last few minutes, we've heard from the White House that they're readying another $1.1 billion support package for Ukraine, including hundreds of armoured vehicles and drones. Fiona Hill worked in the White House under 3 administrations as a senior Russia analyst on the National Security Council. She joins me now. Fiona, it's great to have you back on the programme. Let's talk about these pipelines first of all. The Russians have, of course, denied it. They've said that accusations that they were behind it were stupid. If they were behind it, what could their thinking possibly have been?
Well, I think it's actually fairly clear. And in one of the last segments that you had, when the energy analyst talked about the fact that Gazprom made most of its money out of Europe and that's now ended, and that Gazprom has been sacrificed, Vladimir Putin tells a series of stories about his father during World War II, who was part of an intelligence-led destruction battalion that went behind enemy lines in what is actually now modern-day Estonia, destroying anything that the enemy could possibly use in terms of critical infrastructure. Putin's always weaving these stories to make a point, and here we have a point made that if Russia is not going to benefit from these pipelines, then somebody is actually going to be harmed by their destruction. I think it's very clear, especially given the location around the island of Bornholm, as was also pointed out in your segments, very close to the new pipeline that was just opened, bringing gas from Norway, that this is meant to send a very clear signal that all of the energy infrastructure of Europe could be at risk.
So if you take everything into account, the mass mobilization in Russia, the referendums, the annexation that is imminent, the stuff with the pipelines, it looks as if Vladimir Putin is throwing as much military and strategic spaghetti against the wall as possible to see what works.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly the way to look at it, Matt. And a lot of the places where things are happening have always been points of great vulnerability during the standoff between the Soviet Union and the West during the Cold War as well. I mean, Bornholm, again, was one of those areas where people were very concerned about a confrontation. He's reminding us by putting tactical, intermediate and even strategic nuclear weapons into play, and certain rhetorically, that we can all go back to a period in which anxiety was the theme and the atmosphere of the day. And Putin actually believes now, I'm pretty convinced of it, that he can intimidate everyone into giving up. He's got so many different points of leverage and pressure here, and he's pretty convinced that if he really does throw everything at it, that then the West will capitulate, back off their support for Ukraine and force the Ukrainians to the negotiating table.
I mean, it's a game of bluff, isn't it? But how dangerous is this moment in the war, especially considering his nuclear threats made last week?
Well, look, it isn't a bluff, is it? And I mean, if you see what's just happened in terms of this destruction of the Nordstream 2 pipeline, he clearly does not care about the environmental impact and all of the knock-on effects in this. He intends to make his point. And I'm sure that because this has happened, he'll want to reinforce the idea that using a nuclear weapon of any kind of category, because there's been threats against Poland recently rhetorically by some think tank representatives close to the Kremlin, threats repeatedly against the United States in the Russian media, and also, of course, the not so veiled threats of a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine. He wants to make it clear that he would do this if necessary. So the important thing here is for us to take a step back and to push back against all of this as well. He's testing the unity, and we have to respond to this to show that we also have a plan to address all of these different points of vulnerability.
Okay, one more finally, Fiona, if I may. How weak is his own position inside Russia with all these people trying to run away and not serve in the war?
Well, look, this underscores the fact that the support for this war is pretty brittle at home. He obviously anticipated that it would not be possible to fully mobilise everyone, but I'm not sure whether they fully anticipated tens of thousands of people fleeing across the border, on top of hundreds of thousands who've already left in protest of the war, particularly critical members of the IT and other sectors. We're seeing now the cream of Russian youth, male youth, leaving Russia. And this is going to have an awful lot of knock-on effects because you can't see those people coming back. These are, in fact, refugees from Russia that he's pushed out.
Now, the coming days will be crucial in defining the next phase of this war. The European Union has announced further sanctions against Russia, including plans for a cap on the price of Russian oil. Meanwhile, the United States, together with Poland and Bulgaria, has told its citizens to leave Russia as soon as possible, fearing that its dual citizens might get caught up in the mass mobilization. This is all in response to Vladimir Putin, who has doubled down on the war effort after recent setbacks on the battlefield. Even as the final votes were counted today in the referendums held in 4 regions occupied by Russia, labelled a sham by the West, its leaders, installed by Moscow, have asked for annexation to the Russian Federation. It all points to the fact that Vladimir Putin seems to be preparing for a very long war with rather higher stakes. But what is remarkable is the gulf in morale on both sides. The Ukrainian frontline military band serenading one of these stars of the war. The Bayraktar drone, made in Turkey and sold for $4 million, much cheaper than its costly rivals. Good taste is one of the victims of war, here too, but the end justifies the means. And these drones have been crowdfunded by this guy. Serhiy Prytula is a TV star and household name in Ukraine. And here he was today receiving yet another gift from adoring school children for the war effort. He has spent the war raising over $60 million and turning his charity into an Amazon for military stuff, except it's all free. Battlefield medical kits made in China, assembled here for the front line. Night vision goggles made in Germany, and plenty of drones. There we go. Okay. Yes. So this would be a surveillance drone. Yeah. All this embodies a civic spirit and defiance that Russia just didn't see coming in this war.
I'm so proud with our people and with our brave soldiers that I can't believe it. And I never saw such huge dignity in our society like we have now. So we cannot be slaves, just cannot be. And that Russians need to understand. But they are just running from Russia.
And here they were doing just that. Russian men fresh over the border in Kazakhstan, waiting to join an uncertain future in exile, rather than join the draft at home.
И слова президента не совпадают с тем, что на бумаге написано. И поэтому люди опасаются, которые вот стоят, что рано или поздно будет объявлена полная мобилизация, и тогда уже никто не сможет покинуть границы.
And on the Russian side, they keep trying to leave before the border gets shut to men of fighting age, and Russia becomes a sealed barracks of many reluctant fighters. And they probably don't care much about the stage being erected right now in Moscow's Red Square. Together forever, it proclaims. It is here that the Kremlin will celebrate the impending annexation of parts of occupied Ukraine. Back in Kyiv, they've grown a thick skin. The front line is a few hundred miles from here, but never far from their mind, even as they flock to the opera.
For us, it is very important. For my life, it is very important to have possibility. Classical music, very good. According to this situation in our country, especially important, I think.
If some seats are empty, that's because they will only accommodate as many people as they can put up in the bomb shelter, should there be a raid. It is Russia's war of choice, which has left them with no choice but to take a stand. And necessity is the mother of resilience.